Hello everyone, welcome back to another stream. Hope you're doing well. So this is going to be a bit of a first for me because for tonight's stream, rather than reacting to other people's content, I'm going to kind of open up a bit of my process of script writing and going through lore videos, or not script writing and going through lore videos, script writing for lore videos, I should say. So, I've got a bit of a rough draft going right now. It's not anywhere near complete, but this is, and it's what I'm going to be covering over the night. And I should probably enlarge this. Oh yeah, especially for you guys. Wait, I'm using the wrong, the wrong display there. Okay, so all right, hopefully that's better. I don't know if I was muted. Hold on, let me double check. Okay, no, I do have my mic set up for this one. Okay, so you guys were able to hear me the entire time. All right, so, yeah, this is the script that I've got going so far, and with the release of Final Fantasy VII's Rebirth on the horizon, I'm kind of worried that I'm not going to finish in time to, get this video out before then. So I figured, rather than just, not streaming at all, maybe I could incorporate the two with, the script writing, so that way I could get some live feedback if you guys aren't following what I'm saying. That could help me. And nonetheless, this is kind of something that I wanted to do for a long time, especially for people who might be, on the fence of creating their own content as well. So with that being said, you don't necessarily need to follow the way that I do things, but nonetheless, if my process helps others, I'd be really glad to learn that and hope that it can be motivation to show other people that if you take things step by step, it's really not that bad. It just takes a little bit of patience, and it can be kind of rewarding in a lot of ways to have a piece of your work kind of out there in perpetuity once you complete it. So, right. Everybody, welcome in. Glad we have a pretty decent turnout so far this early in the stream. Astanex, Scowleasy, Mortis, Jesse R, Teen Sith, Scholar of Kurland, Solar of Cooland, or Solar, rather, and Mortis, yeah. Yeah, so typically I like to use Google Docs, as Mortis is saying, because it automatically backs it up, and I don't necessarily need to worry about my files being corrupted that way, which I've had that happen to me in the past. I had a draft of a novel written. I had, at that time, maybe 27,000 words, and then my file got corrupted. And yeah, I was not having a good time after that. And so I just kind of dropped that project, believe it or not, and I haven't gone back to it. So I kind of learned my lesson. And the thing was, I wasn't just using a random text file or, Windows, Microsoft Word. I was using an actual program for it, and I was kind of just shook that it was fully corrupted and they couldn't recover anything. So sucks to suck. What can you say? Yeah. Yeah, and Morty says Word has autosave now if you have your file named. And okay. Scholar of Kurland is Iman. Okay. 1 second here. Yeah, so normally I will have coffee while I'm writing, so this is going to be a bit different for me, trying to stay with water and whatnot because of the mic audio quality. So the reason why I'm bringing up coffee is because if you drink caffeine and coffee, you're really prone to get mouth noise, and I don't want that going on for tonight's stream. So anyway, right now I have about 10 and a half, 11... around 11 pages written of single-spaced font for this. Oh yeah, I meant to enlarge this for you guys. At least this is bigger than my chat. How does this look for you guys? Do you want me to make it bigger, or is this good enough? Hey, tea-watered houseplant, nice to see you again. It's been a minute. You're supposed to have tea, not coffee. Even tea isn't very good for voice recording purposes because it kind of it doesn't exactly dry out the mouth, but it kind of does, and so your saliva kind of sticks. Maybe it depends on the type of tea one drinks, but I haven't really had too much luck with black or green tea for that regard, so yeah. Okay, So this is kind of where I'm at for now. And then like beneath this, I have like previous drafts of things and like a bunch of notes at the bottom. So for anybody who is interested in writing scripts, one of the first things that I will do is I will just kind of start off looking at a bunch of keywords if I have like a theme in mind that I'm like working with, and then I'll start like taking notes about it, and then I just put it down towards the bottom of my screen. Well, I mean, it'll start off at the top, but then as I start writing, I just keep pressing enter and like pushing this stuff down. And if I ever need to refer to anything that I wanted to get to, I'll just scroll down and like look at my notes and whatnot. But right, so that's just kind of the way that I operate. Where is, I can't even see. Oh, it's because it's tiny. Because yeah. Anyway, so I was revising part of this earlier, so I think I should have like a bunch of spaces somewhere over here. Maybe I didn't get to this point, or maybe okay, no. So anyway, once I got to like page 11, I was like revising a lot over here, and so that's why I have like a bunch of breaks. They're not necessarily too important, but that's just kind of one way that I like organize things. So that's a tip that you guys can use. Tea with honey. Hey Chadwick, welcome back to stream. Mortis is here for the discussions, not the script. You can wait for the finished product. I appreciate that nonetheless. So let me go ahead and hydrate here real quick. Drink the old lore indeed. So yeah, as far as like the Microsoft Word stuff goes, I haven't had like a real version of Microsoft Word since I think like 2007. So it's cool that they've got the autosave now, but that wouldn't have saved me earlier because I wasn't even using Word. Anyway, so the topic for this video is ostensibly the grace of old, and there's going to be a ridiculous amount of things to cover. This is potentially the most challenging video that I've had to do yet on Elden Ring. The gold and silver video is, one that would give it a run for its money. So right now the gold and silver video is like pulling ahead in terms of like difficulty, drafting it and whatnot, but I'm not finished with this one yet. So it's probably going to be pretty close. This one might be a little bit easier in some regards, but this one, I won't necessarily say that it like took more research. I mean, that's kind of not fair because it's kind of a culmination of a lot of research over the like past 2 years and whatnot. But compared to the gold and silver video, this one takes a lot of recontextualization of commonly observed. I don't want to say like commonly observed facts, but it just takes a lot of recontextualization on commonly held beliefs about the lore of Elden Ring. And I really do kind of hate having to recontextualize so much because I feel like it can just alienate a lot of people or make them feel discouraged looking into the lore themselves, which is definitely not what I want to do. But I mean, sometimes I can't necessarily talk about what I want to do without doing that. And so generally speaking, I always try to rely on the English as much as possible. And then I highlight what is different between like the Japanese. And so that gives an appearance that the Japanese is completely different from the English, but generally speaking, like most of the English stuff is fine. So, all right, with all of those kind of forewarnings out of the way, I will stop stalling. Not that I'm actually stalling, but begin kind of going over the script. So I wanted to begin with a couple quotes to just kind of set the mental image of where I'm coming from and where I'll be going. So this is a little bit different from some of the other things that I've got going on. So 1 second here. All right. So rather than me like literally saying Ordovis's greatsword or Siluria's tree, I'm putting this here so that way when I go back and do the video editing, I will know what item I'm referring to specifically. So I'll have like the text of Ordovis's greatsword on the screen, maybe with just the icon and then the text floating underneath it. So for the sake of like voice recording, I would begin with, This sword is imbued with an ancient holy essence. Its red tint exemplifies the nature of primordial gold, said to be close in nature to life itself. Then Siluria's tree says, the primordial form of the Erd tree is close in nature to life itself, and this spear, modeled on its crucible, is imbued with ancient holy essence. Tarnished golden sunflower. A large flower that blooms facing the Erd tree. Though wilted and faded, it still retains holy essence. Tree sentinel armor. Altered. It doesn't really matter. Golden armor of the heavy cavalry tree sentinels who serve the Erd tree. Imposingly sturdy and nigh unbreakable, the grace of old yet lingers. So those are like the 4 quotes that I'm going to lead with. Hopefully that will embed or implant the idea of ancient holy essence and the grace of old, essentially. That's kind of where I'm leading off there. So, all right. Though not often talked about, these descriptions hint that the grace found in the lands between today isn't what it used to be. In this episode of Fear the Old Lore, we'll examine the guidance of grace, its history, and its current state while comparing the English and Japanese text of the game for a better understanding of the lore. Mortis says, holy is a rather broad word. You can see how something described as holy essence could be a bit confusing, and what is holy is dependent on one's faith. So it'll become clearer, hopefully, as we go through it. Teen Sith says, everyone's process truly is different, eh? So yeah, I know you've been having a lot of difficulty working on your drafts and whatnot, so I'm curious to see if this will like help you or whatnot, or if you want to share your process, feel free, because who knows, maybe I might adopt some things that you guys in chat do. So all right, not much is said directly about the nature of grace in Elden Ring, though Melina offers that the golden auras found at sites of grace come from the Erd tree, and that their light once shone in the eyes of the Tarnished, and was meant to guide the Tarnished on their mission, though in English, Melina says the rays will guide you through your burden. So I might want to break this up because this is a bit of a run-on sentence. Oh man, this kind of sucks, actually. Not like my sentence. I mean, that might kind of suck a bit too, but like trying to stream this and interact with chat as well as like actually think about the syntax here. It's like 2 different brain modes. So I might like stop looking at chat a lot, or stop like self-narrating and actually just like edit, but I don't know. So I don't know like how you guys operate, but typically when I read things aloud, I can't really absorb what is being said because I'm kind of more focused on the delivery of my voice and whatnot, and so it just doesn't really sink in so much. Anyway, that's kind of like where I'm at here. Like if I'm talking out loud, I'm not really giving the critical eye towards this that I kind of went to. So kind of live learning or growing pains right now, huh? Teen Sith uses a lot of spreadsheets and she handwrites, and then the draft is done on a separate doc for the most part. So like I said, most of my notes are very like at the bottom of the page because they've been shifted down as I've continued to write. So yeah, and other than that, I mean, hold on. I guess I could keep this over here. I have like my spreadsheet with the Japanese and English, and then occasionally I'll use like this extra sheet that I added for some specific notes. So this will come into play like later on in the stream, kind of. So anyway, where is my chat? Okay. All right. So the term used for burden here comes from shime, and while I don't think burden is a bad way to localize it, shime means something akin to a duty, mission, task, or responsibility that's been entrusted to somebody. Depending on the context, shime can also be understood as the purpose behind one's actions, and having this understanding of grace guiding people towards their shime, duty, purpose, or mission will become important in recontextualizing some other item descriptions. No, I can't really talk about... So part of the issue... I should probably read Chadwick's comment. So he asks, does anyone else write a little outline, then just hit record on a voice recorder and talk on your outline for a bit? So certainly some content creators do that, which is perfectly fine. I've done that for a couple of videos that are kind of more off the cuff. Like a couple of my reviews are definitely like that. But for the bulk majority of my like Fear the Old Lore series, I need to use such specific wording and terminology to contextualize things in such a way where I don't ramble and take up everybody's time, that just kind of going off the cuff isn't super conducive, even if I were like to cut out a lot of my ums and ahs and like those kind of words, just because the flow of the words of my sentences would not match up very well in like I guess flow is a good enough word for it. So anyway, so yeah, according to the Lord's rune, they were runes of one who is destined to become a lord, but when the Elden Ring was shattered, all that remained was a distant duty. It should come as no surprise that duty here comes from the same shime used to describe the tarnished's burden. However, one thing this description does is equate one's duty to what was previously their fate or destiny before the Elden Ring was shattered. All right, so I would probably revise the wording on this. I should do it live. Man, I just can't really focus on this. Maybe this was not the best of ideas to stream the draft writing process. Teen Sith can envision a sentence in her head, and then her brain is just like, lol, no thanks, when you pull up the document. So the one problem that I have, and I kind of like fix this as I do the voice recording stuff, is the voice inside my head is a lot more eloquent than my speaking voice and can deliver the lines much better than I can. So when I run into sentences like this, it sounds like perfectly fine when I originally write it and draft it, but it becomes unwieldy when I say it. And so when I get to this, when I voice record, I will like try to read the sentence, and if it doesn't flow off the tongue very naturally, then I will do a quick revision before going on with like the recording process. Okay, so let me look at my sentence here. Yeah, I just don't think I can split my brain to like talk while I do this, and I also don't want to just be like a silent streamer and writing like and not like interacting with the chat too much. So I might just like go over, like just leave like the whole syntax garbage behind and then address any questions as they rise up in chat, because I also can't really like process what I'm reading out loud right now. It might help if you guys have questions for me to like look back at this later and be like, okay, I should tighten up this section or perhaps rearrange some things later. So I'll just kind of like go through, and if you guys do have more pointed questions, I will try to like look back at chat every now and then and address them. Just point the cam at the dog. I mean, some people definitely do that, yeah. I know you guys will be fine because you guys are like the super diehards for the lore stuff, but I don't know. It's just like me personally. Like, if I could turn that aspect of my like neuroses down right now, I would definitely do that. But here we are. Okay, so anyway, I'll just kind of reread this. Not much is said directly about the nature of grace in Elden Ring, though Melina offers that the golden auras found at sites of grace come from the Erd Tree, and that their light once shone in the eyes of the Tarnished, and was meant to guide the Tarnished on their mission. Though in English, Melina says the rays will guide you through your burden. The term used for burden here comes from shime, and while I don't think burden is a bad way to localize it, shime means something akin to a duty, mission, task, or responsibility that's been entrusted to somebody. Depending on the context, shime can also be understood as the purpose behind one's actions, and having this understanding of grace guiding people toward their shime, duty, purpose, or mission will become important in recontextualizing some other item descriptions. According to Lord's runes, they were runes of one who is destined to become a lord, but when the Elden Ring was shattered, all that remained was a distant duty. It should come as no surprise that duty here comes from the same shime used to describe the tarnished's burden. However, one thing this description does is equate one's duty to what was previously their fate or destiny before the Elden Ring was shattered. Does this mean that fate, duty, and destiny are interconnected? Maybe, but it bears a little more exploring. Radagon and Merca's Scar Seals and Sword Seals say that those who are branded were given a lifelong duty by those chosen by the gods, and that solemn duty weighs upon the one beholden, not unlike a gnawing curse from which there is no deliverance. So in a way, the branded become cursed to fulfill their duties or missions, which may be meant to tie into how Roderica says giving Hugh the task to craft a god-slaying weapon was a curse placed upon him by Queen Marika. Because Hugh is so single-mindedly focused on crafting his god-slaying weapons, he's placed his duty over his well-being and is oblivious to the fire consuming himself in the Erd Tree. If we extend that train of thought further to the Tarnished, who place their duty to become Elden Lord over their own well-being as well, then perhaps Roderica is right for saying that Queen Marika has cursed them all. So, urgent heal, great heal, cure poison. The Two Fingers has high hopes for the Tarnished, that even if they should be wounded, even if they should fall, they will continue to fight for their duty. Then I've got the Melina America quote here. My lord and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, you will be driven from the lands between. You will wage war in a land afar, where you will live and die. Then, after thy death, I will give back what I once claimed. Return to the lands between, wage war, and brandish the Elden Ring. Grow strong in the face of death. Warriors of my lord, Lord Godfrey. Then another quote, remembrance of the fire giant. The fire giant is a survivor of the war against the giants. Upon realizing the flames of their forge would never die, Queen Marika marked him with a curse. O trifling giant, mayest thou tend thy flame for eternity. With this, we're told Marika has the power to divest people of their grace, as well as having the power to inflict curses on others by giving them never-ending missions. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Lord's Rune equates fate with duty, which raises the question. If the guidance of grace guides people down the path to fulfill their duty, is this a roundabout way of saying it guides them to their fate? Let's take it a step further. If grace equals fate, then does that mean Marika's ability to divest people of their grace mean she's also able to divest them of their fate as well? I think it's a strong possibility, and by divesting the Tarnished of their destiny, they're able to travel to faraway lands where they could live and die, yet be able to return to the lands between because it wasn't their destiny to die that way. In other words, I think robbing the Tarnished of their grace was robbing them of destined death, and that the grace of old mentioned in this Tree Sentinel armor is a reference to the grace of gold before it was drained of its original color. So that's kind of where I get to like the first big thesis statement. And I've because like I have to write this over like days at a time, I don't think it's going to completely flow supernaturally from this point, because I think I like kind of end up repeating myself a couple times. So that's something that I'll need to like go back and tighten up. But let's see how you guys are doing in the chat right now. Hey Hilka, welcome in. Mortis says, this feels kind of meta given how the player also wishes to finish the game. Everything they do is to complete the game. It's kind of like when Cain was cursed to wander the earth for lying to God. Yeah, the lie was the problem, not the murder for some reason. Yeah, I could go into that, but that's, nope, not gonna go down that route. Let me hydrate real quick. So hopefully, like what I've said so far in the script makes sense. I would probably need to rephrase a couple sentences there and tighten things up a little bit, but it's okay, especially like this last part right here. So, okay. I like to be clear here and say the following is my personal speculation based on the evidence presented in the game, and there will be a number of viable alternative interpretations of the lore. I'll do my best to use clear language which separates fact from my opinion, so strap yourself in because we're going to challenge some commonly held preconceptions about Elden Ring's lore. I almost thought about like putting the lore of Elden Ring, and yeah, I'm going to do that. Just because it flows a little bit better off of my tongue, even though like the other one is like less words. All right. Hey, Scalleezy. Oh, Buster Howdy, how's it going? Cain got turned into a vampire and fathered the 13 modern clans. Yep, we all know that. Mortis says, yeah, America's God can definitely change fate. All right. Got my pillars right here. Thank you. Appreciate that. Oh, there's more to come to Scalleezy. Just you wait. All right. So, before continuing in earnest, I need to address a discrepancy in the description of the Gilded Great Shield. The official English localization for it says, the red tinge in the gold coat mirrors the primordial matter that became the Erdtree, the color of homeward yearning. Unfortunately, by saying the red tinge mirrors the primordial matter that became the Erdtree, it unequivocally makes it sound as though there was a primordial form of matter that would go on to become the Erdtree. The Japanese doesn't quite read that way. So I'm a little bit worried that might be a bit too redundant, but sometimes that's like not a bad thing. Anyway, so a more literal rendering of it would be, the Gilded Great Shield's coating, imitating the Erdtree's origin, possesses a red hue. It is the color of reminiscence. Admittedly, these are very similar readings, but the crucial takeaway here is that in the Japanese text, there's no reference to a primordial form of the Erdtree or a kind of primordial matter that would go on to create it. This is going to become a bigger deal when we examine the Crucible in depth, but for now, it'll suffice to focus on how the Gilded Great Shield has a red-tinted hue. Alright, so... Wait, did I read this one? No, okay. So, similarly to the Gilded Great Shield, the Crucible Horn Shield and Ordovis's Great Shield are said to be crafted from a red-tinged gold, and both possess an ancient holiness within them, which is said to be close in nature to life itself. Because Godric is such a fanboy of Godfrey, the Gilded Great Shield carried by his knights is meant to harken back to Godfrey's time and establishes a parallel connection between the red-tinged gold of the Crucible and the time of Godfrey's rule. So this is something that I was like editing earlier, and I might want to like tweak it a bit more, but yeah, I'm not like completely happy with it, but it seems better than what it was. So I know it's commonly thought that the period of the time predating the Erdtree was the time of the Crucible, but for what it's worth, the Crucible Knights are said to have served Godfrey in their armor set. And that was kind of my inflection issue. Anyway, of course, it doesn't say when they served Godfrey, and there are arguments to be made that the Crucible Knights were the remnants of a previous civilization that was assimilated into the Order of the Erdtree, but I'd like to challenge this position nonetheless. As I've mentioned briefly before, one consistent issue with the English text of the game as it pertains to the Crucible is that it's often called primordial in nature. While Gensho, the term it comes from, can mean primordial within certain contexts, it doesn't necessarily imply a period existing at the beginning of time the way it does in English. Gensho just means the beginning, genesis, or origin of something. This, however, becomes really awkward to translate consistently and coherently into English, and would probably be too nonsensical or distracting to translate the text into something like the Crucible aspect incantations as, it's the power of life which is the origin of the Erdtree, one of the aspects of the Crucible instead. So yeah, I'm not happy with this line, but I would really need to think about how to make it a bit better. So, because I don't like having a quote that is multiple sentence within a larger sentence, and this is also like a really long kind of run-on sentence as well. So this is something I might come back to, or maybe I can just power through it and hopefully like voice act my way through it, even though I'm not like super great at delivery. Right. So I can definitely understand why the translators went with what they did, and I initially read things in a similar way to them for a number of months after the game's release. However, one set of descriptions really stuck out to me because while most of the other Crucible item descriptions were ambiguous, there's really only one way to read the Crucible Knight set. Rather than saying Ogonju no Gensho, which can mean the Golden Tree or the Erdtree's origins in the Crucible aspect incantations, the Gilded Great Shield, Siluria's Tree, and the Godskin Noble set... Wait, hold on. Okay, I see what I did. So, rather than saying Ogonju no Gensho, which can mean the Golden Tree or the Erdtree's origins in the Crucible aspect incantations, the Gilded Great Shield, Siluria's Tree, and the Godskin Noble set, The Crucible Knight set reverses it and says Gensho no Gonju, or the original Erd Tree. Now, keep in mind, while the English version of the Crucible Knight set says it holds the power of the primordial form of the Erd Tree, the Japanese makes no allusion toward a primordial form of the Erd Tree. It just says the original Erd Tree, which doesn't necessarily leave enough room to imply there was a kind of primordial soup or primordial matter that would go on to become the Erd Tree, especially after re-examining the Gilded Great Shield's description. But what could this mean? If there was an original Erd Tree, what does that say about the current state of the Erd Tree? Bearing in mind that I've already said that the Gilded Great Shield's description is a little closer to the Great Shield's coding, imitating the Erd Tree's origins, possesses a red hue, it could imply a connection between the Erd Tree and red-tinted gold, though it's not necessarily explicit, and one could argue the Erd Tree started out red initially, and after it cooled off, its redness went away, similar to how liquid hot metal cools off after being poured out of a literal crucible. Take this with a grain of salt, but I also noticed in Ordovis's greatsword, it says that its red tint exemplifies the nature of primordial gold. What's interesting to me about this is that it's the only description in the game which directly mentions primordial gold, and this got me thinking, could this be a typo? Did the devs make a mistake? For reference, while primordial gold comes from Gensho no Ogon in Ordovis's greatsword, it's only one character off from Gensho no Ogonju, which is used to describe the so-called primordial Erd Tree in the Gilded Great Shield and Crucible Knight sets descriptions. If so, then this could mean that Ordovis's greatsword was supposed to say the original Erd Tree was closer to life, therefore it's said to have a red hue. So I'll use it like the visual to just like give you guys a better look, because I mean this is, I think, like for non-English speakers where visuals really help drive the point home. So I wouldn't use this graphic specifically, but anyway, in Ordovis's greatsword we've got a Gensho no Ogon, whereas in all of the Crucible Knights set it's Gensho no Ogonju. So this character is missing potentially within this line, and so yeah, I just wanted to stress that. And it's also in Siluria's tree. So Ogonju no Gensho, although it's kind of like reversed here. So anyway. So while it technically isn't explicit that the Erd Tree originally had a reddish hue in the Japanese text, it's very strongly implied and suggests that the current version of the Erd Tree doesn't have the same hue as the original. This might be corroborated somewhat in the Warming Stone's description, which says, it said that the Erd Tree was once as warm as the gentle sun and would gradually heal all who bathed in its rays, but the doling of the Erd Tree could have also been a byproduct of the shattering, as hinted at in the Erd Tree seal. Even though the Elden Ring is shattered, and the Erd Tree has dulled from its former radiance, earnest faith continues to hold the answers. Oh yeah, and just to address the final line there, the Japanese says the Erd Tree continues to answer single-minded belief in it, despite the Elden Ring being shattered and the tree being dimmed, so earnest faith doesn't necessarily hold the answers. I should probably revise this. Tea-Watered Houseplant says, even if it's not a typo, you think Siluria's tree mentioning the Erd Tree being close in nature to life itself, and it being tied to red in Ordovis's greatsword, makes it likely that the Erd Tree was red too. Yes. So there's a lot more that I'll go into detail about the redness of the color, but yeah, I'm probably just veering a bit away for now, just to cover some other things. So yeah, I might delete some of this stuff because I don't necessarily think the Warming Stone's description is that relevant. I think maybe this might have just been annoying me with the whole Erd Tree seal, and that might have just used that as an excuse to talk about it. Because yeah, this is kind of distracting from the overall point. So I might just cut this paragraph entirely. So okay. Anyway, if we can accept that at one point the Erd Tree had a reddish hue, and that time coincided with Godfrey's rule as evidenced by the Gilded Great Shield and the Crucible Knight set, then perhaps the ancient holiness found within the Crucible Knight's equipment is meant to coincide with the grace of old that's mentioned in the Tree Sentinel's armor. I know it's unclear when exactly the Tree Sentinels came into being, but for what it's worth, the Golden Halberd and Erdtree Greatshield have Erdtree worship sigils when using their Ashes of War, suggesting that these skills were developed either near the end of the Age of Abundance when Godfrey still ruled, or at the very least before the Age of Golden Order fundamentalism. If so, this would help establish that the grace of old would have still existed during the time of Godfrey, and the Erdtree was likely different as well. This is supported somewhat by a couple unlikely sources in the Erdly Flower and the Tarnished Golden Sunflowers descriptions. Erdly Flowers state that they were said to be fed by leaves that fell from the Erdtree in days of antiquity, which is a bit ambiguous since it's unclear whether these so-called days of antiquity specifically refer to the Age of Abundance or any period of time before the Shattering. For what it's worth, the term used for days of antiquity in Japanese comes from Huri Ogonju, which just means old or ancient Erdtree, and not days or era of the ancient Erdtree, and is the same terminology used for the It's the same terminology used for the ancient Erdtree incantations. It's the same terminology used for the ancient Erdtree incantations, though to be fair, this is also what Roger calls the period right before the Shattering of the Ring. While I think a more critical reading of the text would suggest the ancient Erdtree should be affiliated with Godfrey and his Age of Abundance, I also think it's incumbent upon myself to point out where there's room for argument. So Buster agrees to cut out the Warming Stone description. Yeah, I think I will do that later. All right. So, setting that aside and turning back to the Tarnished Golden Sunflowers for a moment, one part of its description which has really stood out to me is how they're said to retain their holy essence despite being wilted. I'd almost ask if this is supposed to relate to the same kind of ancient holiness found within the Tree Sentinel's armor or the Crucible Knight set, but the normal variants of golden sunflowers retain their color as well as having a powerful holy essence. This might be difficult to follow, so I'll apologize ahead of time, but I think what the golden sunflowers, tarnished golden sunflowers, and Erdly flowers are supposed to show is a change of state in the grace of the Erdtree. I believe in Godfrey's age of the Erdtree was still mortal, like all other forms of life, and that destined death still existed as the rune of death within the Elden Ring. I'll expand more on that point later, but for now I'll turn to the blessing of the Erdtree, Erdtree Heal, and the remembrance of the regal ancestor to support this position. Alright, so, quote, "The Erdtree once flourished with abundance, yet it was only for a fleeting moment. Such is the course of all life." And then, quote, "Ancestral spirits exist as phenomenon beyond the purview of the Erdtree. Life sprouts from death, as it does from birth. Such is the way of the living." End quote. If the Erdtree was like all life explicitly during the Age of Abundance, then it stands to reason that the Erdtree was also fated to die, like all other forms of life. The Erdtree's bounty was not limitless, and it eventually stopped producing its tears or its blessings. However, on a surface level, it might seem contradictory to think that the Erdtree was mortal, because Crimson and Cerulean Sea Talisman say the Erdtree was once perfect and eternal, and if the Erdtree was perfect and eternal, then it shouldn't be subject to death. But by that same token, if the Erdtree truly was perfect and eternal, I don't think its blessings should have run out either. Instead, I think the Erdtree began its existence like all other forms of life, that is, imperfect and mortal, and was later made to be perfect and eternal. I often joke that golden poop and soap are the most important lore items in the game, but I say it with a kernel of truth and sincerity to it. Gold-tinged excrement says, it's a highly stable substance, it doesn't dry out, nor does it lose its customary warmth or scent. For better or for worse, it remains as it is. What this signifies to me is that despite the shattering of the Elden Ring, the lands between is held in a kind of stasis that isn't compatible with the way life was depicted during the Age of Abundance, where death was part of it. The fallen leaves tell a story, and to me, Erdly flowers growing from the fallen leaves of the ancient Erdtree signifies that life was supposed to grow from death during the Age of Abundance, and the Erdtree was no exception. But somewhere along the line, something was done to circumvent the natural cycle of life and death to prolong the age of the Erdtree. Chadwick asks, is gold-tinged excrement just honey? I don't necessarily think I'd say it's honey, but I mean, by all means, take a taste and let us know. There are 4 major possibilities as to how and when this happened, and there's a strong possibility that some of these events overlap or are inseparable from another. I might change this to alter like possibility and possibilities. Anyway, they are the removal of the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, Marika divesting Godfrey and his warriors of their grace, Radagon becoming Elden Lord, and the shattering of the ring. I'll be honest though, I don't think shattering the ring is when stasis was imposed upon the lands between, and I think Miquella and Melania's curse of boundless and eternal life is meant to reflect the flaws of the Golden Order, so I'd put altering of the Erd Tree happening well before the shattering, leaving us left with 3 viable options. I should revise this to like explain why boundless and eternal life is equivalent to the stasis, but maybe this is clear enough for you guys. Let me know what you think about that line, because I might want to revise that. That description is just how you describe honey even left over in Egyptian tombs. So, okay, I see what you mean. You're like, we're saying that kind of a bit more literally, in that it just kind of like stays as it is. Maybe you could make the argument that golden poop is honey, but I think it's more specifically like the gold within it is what keeps its form, essentially. And I'll talk about that kind of aspect of gold in a lot of detail in a bit here. What page am I on? Like 4? 6. Okay. So I'm schmoovin'. Okay, sweet. Okay. So I think the most viable option is when Destined Death was removed from the ring, but this can be a very contentious claim depending upon when one thinks Destined Death was removed on the timeline. Many believe occurred at the beginning of Godfrey's reign on the timeline. I should revise that. And that he established the Golden Order, which is understandable since he begat the Golden Lineage. However, I think there are a number of clues to suggest that the Rune of Death was still part of the ring throughout his reign. First, the Hero's Rune says, there were once heroes who walked the battlefields abundantly blessed by the Erd Tree itself, who upon earning their honor simply died. Now, it's unclear how exactly these heroes died, and there's a strong possibility that by heroes earning their honor, they were killed in battle, and that these kind of deaths might be distinct from Destined Death. Nonetheless, it fascinates me that unlike the Tarnished who can rise and rise again after they've been felled in battle, that in the past, heroes in the past who were blessed by the Erd Tree stayed dead. Sorry, I'm gonna do that. In the past, heroes who were blessed by the Erd Tree stayed dead. And although I've brought it up before, I don't think it was a mistake that the Erd Tree was compared to all other forms of life in the blessing of the Erd Tree or Erd Tree Heal, and that the remembrance of the regal ancestor specifies the way of living sprouts from death as well as birth. I should touch this up. It may also be worth mentioning that if the churches of Marika weren't repurposed from pre-existing buildings, that cemeteries are often found within their grounds and could suggest that death still existed in at least one period during Marika's reign. Erd Tree burial is also an interesting topic to bring up, because if they were feeding corpses to the roots of the Erd Trees, then they had to come from somewhere. It's possible those given Erd Tree burial specifically were those who died in battle, which may be different from Destined Death, but it's a shame we never get clarification on that front. Aside from that, we know during the time of Godfrey there were duelists who honored the Erd Tree by fighting in the Colosseums, and this was a practice that died out during the time of King Consort Radagon, and that the duelists were converted into becoming Grave Wardens. It's unclear whether Radagon wanted to keep others out of the catacombs, or if he wanted to keep things in them, but there are enough issues with the catacombs, it's probably best to leave it alone for now. What may be most significant to me is that while we're told the Golden Order began upon the Rune of Death's removal from the Elden Ring, we're not told when that happened, and there's actually nothing in the text to directly support the Golden Order's existence during the time of Godfrey. Instead, almost everything relating to the Golden Order can be related to Radagon in one form or another, and may have been meant to be inexorably tied to Golden Order fundamentalism, because even the Golden Order seal strengthens only Golden Order fundamentalist incantations, and scales on intelligence as well as faith, whereas none of the Erdtree incantations use intelligence at all. So I feel like this is a really long run-on sentence, and I should revise that. Lots of revision left to do. All right, let me hydrate real quick. Additionally, while Radagon is called Radagon of the Golden Order in his boss fight, his Japanese title plate is a little different and essentially says Golden Order, Radagon, which can make it sound as though Radagon is literally the Golden Order, kind of similarly to how Loretta can be understood as the Knight of the Halig Tree, or how Morgott can be called the Omen King or the Fell Omen. The closest thing to suggest that the Golden Order existed in Godfrey's time comes from the Telescope's description, which says, during the age of the Erdtree, Carian astrology withered on the vine. The fate once written in the night skies had been fettered by the Golden Order. Unfortunately, it's not clear when exactly the age of the Erdtree was, because even Roger mentions it was the prosperous or golden age of the Erdtree during Radagon's reign before the shattering of the Elden Ring. But even supposing for a moment that the age of the Erdtree in the Telescope's description is specifically referring to Godfrey's age, there's still enough ambiguity within the text where fettering the fate in the night skies can be taken as a metaphor for the marriage between Rennala and Radagon. Yet, if Carian astrology could control the fate in the night skies to begin with during Godfrey's reign, this would suggest the Elden Ring didn't exert as much control over her fate as it does now. Protection of the Erdtree. Quote, in the beginning, everything was in opposition to the Erdtree, but through countless victories in war, it became the embodiment of order. End quote. Perhaps the Elden Ring during Godfrey's time didn't exert nearly as much power at all if it didn't originally embody order. Perhaps the Elden Ring during Godfrey's time didn't exert nearly as much power at all if it didn't originally embody order. That just sounds kind of weird to me. If it didn't fully embody order, I'll need to go back to that one for sure. All right. Because so much of the Golden Order's history and identity is wrapped up within Radagon, and its creation is necessitated upon the removal of the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, it leads me to believe Radagon may have had a role in it, but it's unclear how or when exactly it happened. If Radagon is truly meant to be the Golden Order, then there's a chance he was created when the Rune of Death was removed, and would mean the Rune of Death should have been removed before the Liurnian Wars and before Radagon became Elden Lord. If this is the case, then the tarnishing of the Grace of Old would be a separate event from removing Destined Death, since Radagon and Godfrey briefly coexisted on the timeline, and Godfrey was banished only after Radagon returned to Leyndell. With fate being synonymous with destiny, I've wondered if the fate in the night skies is supposed to tie to Destined Death in some way, since both come from Moonmei in Japanese, and if Renala's lunar magic was able to guide the fate in the night sky, then perhaps it could guide the fate of Destined Death as well. So, here I might want to revise it a little bit and add another quote about like the fate in the night skies and the moon parting ways. I don't remember which description it is verbatim. Parted ways. I should probably just like look up moon or something like that. Stars and the moon. Moon and stars. It's definitely like, okay, here it is. Carian retaliation. This is the Carian royal family's secret means to prepare against the disloyalty of the Academy. The moon and stars would one day go their separate ways. Thank you, Two Watered Houseplants. Hey, Jarhead, how's it going, man? Welcome to stream. I know you work on content as well, so hopefully you could see how I work, and maybe that'll like help you out, or like vice versa. That'd be cool. So I'm gonna add this to my notes. Karian retaliation. Says on page 9. All right, so this would be good enough. And I do kind of want to incorporate other stuff about the moon turning away, destined death, but it's kind of hard to stay like on a coherent train of thought, yet still somehow encapsulate everything. It's kind of impossible to do. And so like one of the struggles that I run into with like drafting scripts and whatnot is following threads as far as I can, and then like going back to the main topic and then hammering on a different point home to the point where I fear it sounds like really redundant and people will just be like, all right, get on with it then. But yeah, that's just kind of something you got to deal with. You got to pick your poison. Jay Moore says, yes, that spell is underrated for lore significance. So yeah, I'm thinking about like coming back to where I was around here. Hold on, where was I? Okay, I was around here. Okay, I'm going to add a bunch of like paragraph breaks and then carry in retaliation. And so I'll know to like come back here and then like address it as far as like a little note. So, okay, I'll reread this paragraph and then like start the next quote right after I hydrate. With fate being synonymous with destiny, I've wondered if the fate in the night skies is supposed to tie into destined death in some way, since both come from Unmei in Japanese, and if Renala's lunar magic was able to guide the fate in the night sky, then perhaps it could guide the fate of destined death as well. Then, quote, as the husband of Renala of Caria, the red-haired Radagon studied sorcery, and as the husband of Queen Marika, he studied incantations. Thus did the hero aspire to be complete. End quote. It's unclear why exactly Marika and or Radagon thought Renala's sorcery was necessary for his completion, but one thing the English doesn't convey as well as the Japanese is that Radagon's completion is synonymous with the same kind of perfection mentioned in things like the Litany of Proper Death and Goldmask's suspicion of the holism of the Golden Order. In many ways, it seems like the role of the Golden Order is to perfect itself, but of course, this reading is contingent on whether you think Radagon's brand of Golden Order fundamentalism is different from the Golden Order in general. But what does the perfection of the Golden Order entail? By my estimation, the goal of the Golden Order is to rectify the issues inherent within the Erd Tree during the Age of Plenty. Rather than having an Erd Tree whose abundance can run out, Marika and Radagon want to turn Godfrey's epoch of glistening life into an eternal one by using the tenets of Golden Order fundamentalism to increase the bounty of their grace. Quotes, in Marika's own words, I declare mine intent to search the depths of the Golden Order. Through understanding of the proper way, our faith, our grace is increased. Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past. My comrades, why must ye falter? Buster asks, did Radagon know incantations before returning to Lane Dell? So, based off of the English version of the script here, the answer would be no. However, my answer is that I think it's very possible he should have already known incantations, and there's a slight difference in the Japanese version of the Radagon icon where they use hearsay. So it is said that he studied sorcery with Renala and incantations from Marika as her husband. So it's a little bit unclear whether or not the hearsay is meant to encapsulate this whole first sentence, or if it's meant to encapsulate the last clause to talk about the incantations. So I think the story is, like, the official, like, Golden Order propaganda story is he learned sorcery from Renala and then incantations from Marika. But I think the truth of the matter is he didn't need to learn shit from Marika because he is Marika to some degree. So this is kind of how I read it. And many people disagree with that because they just don't like to cope with the fact that hearsay can indeed be hearsay. Hold on. All right, so Jarhead asks, perhaps the Elden Ring during Godfrey's reign didn't exert as much influence over the concept of order if the concept of order had yet to be established. You'd say it was the removal of DD, Erd, Tree Rebirth that is this control? Sorry. Let me try to reread this without speaking it. Yeah, so I think you're picking up what I'm putting down, Jarhead, that I think Destined Death has to deal with the fate in the night skies, and because I don't believe Destined Death was removed from the Elden Ring until after the Age of Godfrey, I think that's partially why Carian astrology was able to flourish during his reign. Oh yeah, that's a good point, Tea-Watered Houseplant. That Barrier of Gold kind of implies he may have used it since it mentions him being around during its use. Yeah, that's a really good corollary. Is that the right word? I think it's the right word. Gonna Google. I'm gonna get artery, aren't I? Oh yeah, no, okay, I'm right. Oops, what am I doing? I'm pressing shift instead of control. Okay, yeah. Buster Sud says, thanks, that's interesting. You always just assumed he was using them because he was a champion of the Golden Order, but that quote made you ask. Yeah, no, I appreciate the questions. So hopefully, I know me being really pedantic about hearsay really rubs a lot of people the wrong way, but I'm right. They can get over it. I don't know. Nothing else to say about that. So anyway, it's unclear. Wait, did I read this? No, probably not. It's unclear. Oh, no, I definitely did read that. What does the perfection of the Golden Order entail? Where was that? Oh, yeah, I read this quote. Okay, so I'm going to reread this thing and then just continue. By my estimation, the goal of the Golden Order is to rectify the issues inherent within the Erd Tree during the Age of Plenty. Rather than having an Erd Tree whose abundance can run out, Marika and Radagon want to turn Godfrey's epoch of glistening life into an eternal one by using the tenets of Golden Order fundamentalism to increase the bounty of their grace. Then Marika's quote, through understanding of the proper way, our faith, our grace is increased. Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past. Comrades, why must you falter? All right. Marika's dialogue here is important because it emphasizes that the grace during the blissful early days of blind belief was insufficient, and by applying scholarship to their faith, the bounty of their grace could be increased. This coincides with the way Golden Order fundamentalist incantations scale with intelligence as well as faith, and highlights the contrast between the way ancient Erd Tree and Erd Tree worship incantations scale on faith alone. So now that I read it this way, it doesn't sound that awkward, does it? Or did I even read this before? Anyway, maybe it was another sentence or paragraph. All right. So, it's unclear when Marika declared her intent to search the depths of the Golden Order. Oh, sorry. It's unclear when Marika declared her intent to search the depths of the Golden Order. It's possible she made her decree before transforming into Radagon and participating in the Liurnian Wars, and it's also possible she made her decree once Radagon returned to Leyndell after he learned Carian sorcery. Perhaps her proclamation happened before Destined Death was removed from the Elden Ring, and by declaring her intent to research the Golden Order, she was beginning to walk down a path that would ultimately lead to the removing of the Rune of Death from the ring. The game is woefully vague on that front, and much is left open to interpretation. So, right. One thought that I had after watching Miss Chalice's video last night was at what point were the Tarnished forced to go along with the Golden Order? Because you could make the argument that if the Golden Order was established with Godfrey, they were kind of always following the Golden Order. And then that kind of makes it a bit weird for Melina to say, trying to become Elden Lord goes against the Golden Order. So setting that aside for now, one thought that I had was, I think this quote here might have happened before Marika divested Godfrey and his Warriors of Grace, and that the comrades who were faltering may have been like those who would go on to become the Tarnished. I don't think we could exactly call them Tarnished at this point. I don't think they'd like been drained of grace or anything like that. But this is kind of like what makes the most logical sense in my head right now for a variety of reasons. So the Tarnished could have originally been given the mission of the Golden Order, even if like they didn't necessarily want it. But there's also like that super long period of time where after the Tarnished get banished, the Golden Order becomes like the rule of the lands between. So maybe it doesn't really matter if the Tarnished were meant to follow the Golden Order originally, or it just kind of became the rule later on. These are kind of all possibilities, but they're all kind of annoying in their own little ways there. So Jay Moore says the Elden Ring wasn't always controlled by stars and fate. Then it was for a while. Then it reversed it again. So no, not exactly. The way that I would say it was that the Elden Ring did not control stars or fate. Then after Radagon and the removal of destined death, then the fate in the night skies is likely fettered. And then once it got shattered, then like it may have lost control. But yeah. And you said, kind of like Godfrey and Geraint regressing back to a bestial state prior to intelligence granted by grace. Follows with death too. Pre-Erdtree death wasn't destined death. Then it was. Then destined death was sealed. So I think your interpretation of the lore is different from mine, where I would say pre-Erdtree death may have still been destined death. We don't exactly know. Then the like Crucible Erdtree style time happened and like destined death was still a thing, but I don't think the Elden Ring really exerted a lot of control over it. And I think it was able to be manipulated by people like Renala who could use the moon to guide the stars, because I don't think the Elden Ring controlled the stars. Okay, yeah. So that was something I wanted to revise earlier. So that had to deal with, where was I? When I made the quote about like how it had to become the embodiment of order, I think this reveals to us that in the early days of Godfrey, the Elden Ring was not nearly as powerful then as it is now, even though it's like shattered, because it did not embody order. And because it did not embody order, I think that's why like the Fate in the Night Skies was more free to do like whatever it is that Fate in the Night Sky does. All right, so hopefully that answers your questions. All right, did I read this one? I think I did. Yeah, okay, I read that. So, like I said, it's unclear when she made her proclamation, and potentially by declaring her intent to research the Golden Order, she was beginning to walk down a path that would ultimately lead to the removal of the Rune of Death from the ring. It's open to interpretation. So, if, however, the Erdtree was originally like all life and destined to have a short period of abundance, when did it become perfect and eternal like the Crimson and Cerulean Seed talismans say? It hardly seems like it would have become perfect and eternal after the shattering, and even Golden Seeds say it was as if life itself knew its end had come. I wanted to like work on this, but probably just add after the shattering there. It hardly seems like it would have become perfect and eternal after the shattering, and even Golden Seeds say it was as if life itself knew its end had come after the shattering. I'll just need to like go back. So this leaves us with few options. The Erdtree would need to be made perfect and eternal sometime after the Erdtree's bounty had stopped flowing, and sometime before the shattering and the Night of the Black Knives. The two most likely times for this to happen would be when Godfrey and the Tarnished were divested of their grace, or when Radagon became Elden Lord, and there's a distinct possibility these events are related. Unlike some who think Radagon becoming Elden Lord doesn't change much, I'm of the opinion that Radagon becoming Elden Lord should be treated no different from the Tarnished becoming Elden Lord, and I think that in order to become Elden Lord, one must either change or mend the ring. Maybe like Elden Ring? Alright. With Radagon's Elden Rune, as it's described in a sword and scar... I'll just need to work on this entire thing. Okay. With Radagon's Elden Rune, as it's described in his sword and scar seal... Okay. I'm just like enunciating this wrong. All right, I'll just like redo this entire paragraph real quick. Let me swig a little bit more water. Unlike some who think Radagon becoming Elden Lord doesn't change much, I'm of the opinion that Radagon becoming Elden Lord should be treated no differently from the Tarnished becoming Elden Lord, and I think that in order to become Elden Lord, one must either change or mend the ring. With Radagon's Elden Rune, as it's described in a sword and scar seal, appearing within the Elden Ring itself. Yeah, I'll just need to like change this because I'm failing to actually say how I said it in my head. With Radagon's Elden Rune, as it's described in a sword and scar seal, appearing within the Elden Ring itself in Golden Order incantations like Litany of Proper Death, as well as the Sacred Relic Sword's Waves of Gold weapon art, and Litany of Proper Death saying it creates an image of order. Oh man, this is really bad. I take it to mean that his own rune was integrated into the Elden Ring, not unlike a mending rune. So sorry, like I'm like cutting my own self off reading this. Hopefully that like makes sense regardless. So this is one of those cases where disembodied voice protagonist sounds better than body attached voice protagonist, apparently. Hey Stella, welcome into the stream. Nice to have you again. So, for the sake of argument, even if the Rune of Death was removed in Godfrey's time, I'd still be of the opinion Radagon altered the ring upon becoming Elden Lord, and that it should have had an effect on the lands between at large. Okay, yeah. So for the sake of argument, even if the Rune of Death was removed in Godfrey's time, I'd still be of the opinion Radagon altered the ring upon becoming Elden Lord, and that it should have had an effect on the lands between at large. So, quotes. This is from Law of Causality. I think I didn't label it because it's like really obvious what it's going to be, and I just didn't want to spend the time. Yeah, so this is like part of the rough draft of the script that I'm working on, and it's pretty rough so far. So like if you guys have questions about like when I'm going through certain things, that might be helpful for me to try to rephrase things or reorganize some thoughts to be a little bit more clear. So it's kind of like the goal right now, although I've discovered very quickly into the stream this was not like the best of ideas, just because I can't seem to activate the part of my brain which like wants to edit things super well and like focus on that, as well as like deactivate the part of my brain which is cognizant of chat and all that stuff, and also like managing both of those parts of my like brain and psyche with my inability to read and absorb what I read out loud. So I'm having a bit of a rough time here, but hopefully it's all good. All right, so oops. This is where we're going to get into some of the crazier parts of the draft, and so stay with me here. The fundamentals describe the Golden Order through the powers of regression and causality. Causality is the pull between meanings, that which links all things in a chain of relation. Regression is the pull of meaning, that all things yearn eternally to converge. So I put both of them in there. Okay. So the following is metatextual and doesn't come from the game. Causality comes from Inga, which is the Buddhist term for karma and is related to fate. It would take too much time to go into detail about what karma really means, and I'd probably get parts of it wrong anyway, but long story short, while it's often associated with the idea of destiny or reincarnation, depending on the school of thought, karma is less about the end destination and is more focused on how chains of relationships are linked together to create specific outcomes. In other words, calling it the law of causality works perfectly well as a translation, but it doesn't convey the same nuance of being tied to fate quite as well as the Japanese version. As the Japanese does. The law of regression operates on a similar principle, and while some the law of regression operates on a similar principle, and while some cultural context might give us a better picture of the law of causality, unfortunately the same can't be said for regression. Instead, we may be able to learn more about it from looking at another spell directly related to it, Immutable Shield. The effects of Immutable Shield aren't particularly remarkable. They just increase all forms of non-physical damage negation and ailment resistance, but the name itself might give us some insight into how the law of regression is supposed to function. To be immutable is to be constant and unchanging, or said another way, eternal. If Radagon introduced or enhanced the fundamental powers of causality and regression within the Elden Ring, then this could potentially account for a change in the fate of the night skies and the Erdtree becoming perfect and immutable. Because Marika also sought to increase the bounty of their faith and their grace, this leads me to believe Marika may have applied the tenets of Golden Order fundamentalism to grace itself, and the once red-tinged grace of old was drained of color and later transformed by the power of regression to become immutable and yellow. So, yeah, these last two paragraphs I kind of added in to maybe potentially rework what I was going with, but I'm going to have an alternate take on part of the script here in a moment. So, I'm kind of reaching the end of what I've gotten so far. So, anyway, as I mentioned earlier, Lords Runes state they held the fate of one who should have become a lord, but once the ring was shattered, their fates became a distant, far-off duty, and in Heroes Runes, there were once heroes who walked the battlefields abundantly blessed by the Erdtree itself, who upon earning their honor simply died. So, I was running into issues here, and I kind of stopped because I had other stuff to do in real life. So, I was originally thinking for this section here, I would go back into how grace might be intended to be related to fate. And I was going back through the beginning of the essay to see if I set that up super strongly. And while I think I kind of did, I also think I really didn't. And so I might want to either touch on that subject again or something like that. But I feel like it's a little bit of a weak argument, even though I do think there's a decent amount of support for it. I don't think there's a lot of concrete support for it. It's just kind of implied stuff about fate, and that I think it's heavily implied that fate is related to gold and the grace of gold specifically, but it doesn't have that kind of explicit connection that I would prefer in making these kind of claims to for a rough draft. This is pretty clear. Yeah, I mean, that's how I tend to write. And I mean, even though this is a rough draft, lots of it are not the first take of these paragraphs that I've written, but I also tend to really try to pay attention to how well my thoughts flow into each other and how natural they are. And so that's kind of why it's in this state. And so obviously it does need a decent amount of tweaking here. So it does need further revision down the line, but thank you for that. So, yeah. So, okay. Ignoring these two sentences, I'll go back, or paragraphs, I'll go back to this one and then skip down to see if it strikes a chord with the rest of you guys. Okay. So, the effects of Immutable Shield aren't particularly remarkable. They just increase all forms of physical damage negation and ailment resistance, but the name itself might give us some insight into how the law of regression is supposed to function. To be immutable is to be constant and unchanging, or said another way, eternal. If Radagon introduced or enhanced the fundamental powers of causality and regression within the ring, then this could potentially account for a change in the fate of the night skies and the Erdtree becoming perfect and immutable. So yeah, I'm not happy with this by any means, but anyway. I don't know what I had before where I cut it off to say, we can comfortably associate fate or destiny with the guidance of grace and runes to some degree. If Marika took the grace that was already within the Tarnished and transformed it to become immutable with the power of regression, then perhaps it could forestall their fates as well. But it seems that if this were the case, their fates weren't completely removed, but were instead transformed into a duty, calling, or mission that would gnaw upon them like a curse from which there is no deliverance. In some ways, the Tarnished might be comparable to the Headless Mausoleum Knights who guard wandering mausoleums. According to their armor, the wing-shaped ornaments on its back evoke the... According to their armor, the wing-shaped ornaments on its back evoke the Deathbird, and a self-inflicted curse that ties the spirits of these loyal knights to the land, having willingly beheaded themselves so that they may serve their masters in death. So while the Tarnished might not be headless or cursed in the traditional sense, their purpose or duty to go out and wage war in a land afar where they will live and die may have sustained them and allowed them to serve their masters even in death. And if having a purpose is enough to sustain someone from going hollow in Dark Souls, it's all the more reason to believe it could sustain the Tarnished as well. This is heavy speculation, but I think the reason America would have even wanted such a system to begin with was to funnel the spirits of the dead to the Erd Tree to keep providing a source for its blessings. So that's kind of like the next part of the story that I wanted to go into here. I guess I can't really say like story, but the script. And yeah, now this is kind of like more of my notes or like redrafts of things that I've previously written. So I'm not like too worried about that. I definitely want to figure out a way to incorporate the moon a bit more strongly and talking about the eclipse and its ability to forestall destined death. Although it's a little bit awkward to talk about and fit into everything else without just being like, oh, hey, Lord Tidbit, the moon, it can stop destined death. Radagon studied the moon. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at for now. So anyway, if you guys have questions about what I've written so far, please let me know. If you think something is particularly unclear or you want more clarity on, or if you just have questions in general, feel free to bring them up now, because I do need to take more time to work on this draft. So unfortunately, like my grand plan of just like actually being able to work on this on stream doesn't seem to work for me. But I mean, it was worth an attempt, and at least gives you guys a bit of an insight that probably is a little bit woefully underexplored in the realms of YouTube's in like kind of drafting a so-called video essay. So even if like it was a failure for me on like, you know, trying to be cheeky and work while I'm streaming, it just might help serve other purposes as well and give like people a bit of guidance as to how to like make things a bit more manageable. But of course, like me just reading this like directly might not be the best case for that, but at least it shows like a bit of the process at work and the fact that like it doesn't all come out in one go, no matter how it may initially seem. So, all right, I'm going to hydrate real quick and tuck in the doggies. If you guys have any questions or comments, by all means, feel free. Graduate seminar vibes in a good way. Yeah, ironically enough, I can't stand like the higher academia because it gets a bit too cloistered, like the whole ivory tower aspect of it. So that's part of why I never wanted to pursue that. So Jarhead asks, could I go back to the beginning and sort through each paragraph as I feel now that I've gone through the premise once? Could you elaborate? I'm not entirely following what you're saying there. Scott Easy says, I haven't even mentioned the Albinorc blood clot yet. Shake your head. Is this even a real lore video? No, it's not. It's a script. Getting wrecked. Where the poop at? The poop is right there in the middle. It's like on page 4 or something. I don't know. No, that's primordial gold. It's a little bit further down. Okay, here it is. Gold tinged excrement. Golden poop. And soap. Even though I actually didn't go into the true description of soap. Yeah, Smo might like albinoric blood clots, but he ain't got nothing on some golden poo. Truly, it is a lore vid. I mean, it's being made into one, but it's not exactly quite there yet. So yeah, I guess I could like give a bit of a summary so far, hopefully. Page 1 quotes that talk about the grace of old. So yeah, I guess I could like ask you guys in chat whether or not you are like following me, that I believe that there was a true difference in the grace of gold, and if there ever was a difference in the grace of gold, that it would have been during Godfrey's time. There are some quotes where I like haven't mentioned it yet. I really want to go back and work into the draft somehow, like the memory of grace, because it says that it's the memory of first grace specifically, and that's kind of related to the tarnished, which are related to Godfrey. But yeah, it just kind of like got pushed further down the pipeline as I like continue to revise and iterate things. Oh, you actually wanted me to see me go through the paragraph by paragraph, making edits? I wish I could. I mean, I probably can. I just kind of worry that it would be extremely boring for you guys, because I don't seem to have the capability to like talk through a lot of my thought processes here and like actually turn on the editing side of my brain appropriately, because that was my original plan. Actually, I wasn't really trying to read it all the way through first, but here we are. Scalise thinks grace would have changed as the ring and current order changed as well. If Mary can take it away, then she can change it, in your opinion? Yeah, so to go back to that summary idea, the basic premise is that I don't think there's meant to be a difference in the holy essence that's described in Ordovis's greatsword, Siluria's tree, and the tarnished golden sunflower, and that I believe that holy essence is equivalent to the grace of old, which is spoken of in the tree sentinel armor. And because the tree sentinels are using like the Erd tree worship incantations and whatnot, that they would have existed during Godfrey's time, and so the grace of old equals Godfrey's time, and also all of the crucible stuff with their ancient holy essences is related to Godfrey by virtue of the crucible knights being followers of Godfrey. And then I think the tarnished golden sunflower is a little bit of an incidental thing, but I also don't think it's a coincidence that the tarnished golden sunflower is described as being tarnished. Hello, Murder Your Memory. Welcome on into stream. Add Subway Surfers and Family Guy funny edits on the side so people don't get bored. That's kind of not my style. I do it every once in a while, but I probably should actually like keep like the whole ADHD Gen Z type brain thing going so people don't get distracted. Elden said, would I happen to remember some stuff you brought up about the sun and the crucible a while back on the server? I might not remember the specifics, but I mean, I probably like thought about it in a similar way. And also, welcome back into stream, Elden Enthusiast. Nice to see you again. Because there are like a lot of notes that I cut from my gold and silver video. I think a lot of them were related to Mikola and the Eclipse and stuff. Because I don't remember what really made it into the final video, because I really put on some tinfoil stuff, which I think does have a lot of substance and weight behind it, but I felt like it was just too rambly and a bit distracting for the gold and silver video, which was already literally an hour long by the time I finished everything and covered way too much as it was to begin with. So you might be saying that the sun was related to the Crucible back then. I don't know if that was the case. I think it's possible, like, the sun was a bigger thing in the era before the Crucible, before Godfrey, because of like Farum Azula and whatnot, but I don't really know. Jesse asks, in what age did the two fingers come into play, do you think? That is a really, really good question, and one that I've wondered myself. I don't have like the best of answers because it's so strange how they do fit into the timeline. Ostensibly, they should exist during the war against the fire giants because we do get the two fingers banners within the giant conquering heroes catacomb or grave or whatever it's called. So they should have been around that long ago. We're also told that Godwyn had a finger reader as a wet nurse, so they were around at the birth of Godwyn. I do think it's possible that Godwyn was born before Godfrey became Elden Lord, and I think part of my rationale for that is Godwyn, from the very few depictions we do have of him as like a human before he becomes a merman, he resembles Godfrey and Marika much more than he does like Moog and Morgott. So I think there's a strong possibility that he was the eldest child. But who knows, because he's supposed to be like the scion of gold. I know some people think that Morgott and Moog are older, but if they are, I don't know why exactly Godfrey would have differed so much in appearance compared to them. Hey Ontos, welcome into stream. Can I explain what the exact Japanese translation is on Beyond the Purview of the Erd Tree and the Ancestor description? Let me pull that up. Regal Ancestors, or probably just Regal Ancestors, good enough. Oh yeah. So that which is a like ancestral spirit is a mystery that is on like the outside of the Erd Tree. So Beyond the Purview of the Erd Tree, I think is a good localization, even if it is a little bit flowery. Like the Japanese is just very plain. It just says it's like outside the Erd Tree, it's beyond the Erd Tree essentially, and it's a mystery. And the term for mystery here is Shinpi, which is like there's a lot of history behind this as far as like my channel is concerned. It just means like arcane, holy mystery, etc., a divine mystery essentially. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question. Where in the timeline would I place Farum Azula's rooted design of the Elden Ring? That's another good question. I don't know, because there's just a lot of unanswered questions about it. I'm not entirely convinced that it's a different design of the Elden Ring to an extent. I know like that sounds like super sacrilegious and everything, but like with the exception of the roots, the main portion of it might actually still meant to be comparable to like Godfrey's time. I'm just uncertain, but nonetheless, even if it isn't Godfrey's time, I don't think it could be before like the dragons. So I would say at the very earliest before Godfrey. So yeah, whether or not it overlaps with Godfrey's era is a good question. There's the possibility that Godfrey went to Farum Azula and then claimed that Elden Ring / Marika for himself, and then it kind of like, transitioned into his age. Elden says, a scholar named Kircher described the sun's generative powers as akin to a crucible where all the metals are mixed with the fumes having their individual properties. So with that being said, if you look at the Warming Stone's description, you might be able to come to a similar conclusion. And my take on the crucible form of the Erd Tree is that it does blend life together, but I don't necessarily think is the like literal. I don't think the crucible was a primordial soup that was the origin of all life. I think the role of the Erd Tree was to absorb the souls of the dead and kind of like take their gold or their runes or their spirits essentially and kind of grow from that death. And I think that ties into that quote that I have in the thing where it becomes the embodiment of order. Protection of the Erd Tree. I always forget which description this is. So In the beginning, everything was in opposition to the Erd Tree, but through countless victories in war, it became the embodiment of order. And then there's another one that I wanted to mention, but I didn't in here. I'm drawing a really big blank. Okay. All right, anyway, T-Watered asks, do I think gold was always red or only once the crucible happens? So that's a good question. It might be possible that gold in the form of lightning was like fully red during the time of the ancient dragons. And then once Godfrey and Marika created the crucible, it became red tinged gold and was mostly like orange, kind of like in the Crucible Knights armors. Let me pull some of those up. So the Crucible Horn Shield is very explicit in its item description where it says like it's got the red tinged hue or something like that. Great Shield of red tinged gold carried by Crucible Knights features a great horn. So yeah, Akami Obita. So it's like gold that possesses redness. So yeah. And then after, I think, the time of the Crucible and more during the time of Radagon, that's when the red-tinged gold got taken away, most likely upon Marika divesting the Tarnished of their grace, I think. And whether or not that coincides with Destined Death is kind of the $1 million lore tuber question. Jay Moore asks, could the loss of color in sunflowers and red-tinged gold coincide with the Sunrealm Shield? I would say no, because I believe the Sunrealm Shield should predate everything that we potentially know. I think it predates like all of the Godfrey's time. I don't know if it predates Sarash's time, but there's the strong possibility because Beastmen and Fair Missoula also carry the Sunrealm Shield, and I don't think that's like a dev oversight. Elden says, Elden Star's incantation is tinged red or it stole its groove. Let me pull that up. Key art. That's not key art. Screenshots? Okay. So this is an original screenshot of like the promo art. And one thing that I noticed about this design in particular, which I mean is still kind of in the game, is that if you compare this Elden Star's incantations pose to Golden Order totality, it's inverted. So rather than the palms being face down, they're face up. So I think Golden Order fundamentalism could have like inverted the order of the Erd Tree. So my current thoughts are that Radagon and Marika used the tenets of Golden Order fundamentalism to alter the grace of gold by using the powers of causality and regression, with causality being tied to fate and regression being tied to immutability. So if you took fate and then made it immutable or constant or unchanging, then does that mean you don't get to the end point of your fate, and so you just kind of get stuck in a loop of causal chains and whatnot? That's kind of like my headcanon for now. Hopefully that makes sense for you guys. And while I didn't get into it in the essay yet, there's also a couple lines here and there where it says like death returns to the Erd Tree, and that if you burn the Erd Tree, it will unleash death itself, which I think is very fascinating. So I've wondered whether or not the Erd Tree literally contains people's fates or destined death within it. That seems like a strong possibility, but you know, we're never really given anything super concrete there. Maybe the Erd Tree absorbed the sun 5-head. That might have happened because, like I said, with the moon and whatnot, Renala and Radagon were like studying Karian lunar sorcery together, and the moon can be used to go in front of the sun to create an eclipse potentially and ward away destined death, according to the Eclipse Great Shield. I mean, the Eclipse Great Shield doesn't quite say it that way, but I mean, that's the takeaway that you can get from its description. Jarhead says, do you think there's anything to the white and black orbs on the horn shield? Sort of a yin-yang thing going on, both emanating roots too. Let me pull that back up. I don't know. They've been really interesting to me because, I don't know, they just look weird. I think they're, if anything, they might be kind of related to the shield talisman, the ritual shield talisman, I think. Whatever it's called. I don't think I actually have it labeled. So I think it kind of looks like this, essentially, but it is a bit different. There's a pre-release trailer with someone doing that while using the flower crucible item too. I mean, like the pose. Yeah, that seems like a Erdtree, ancient Erdtree type pose, perhaps. Do I discuss glimpsing the primeval current and the Elden stars in this stream? No, I do not. I thought about bringing that up, but it doesn't exactly seem entirely relevant to the grace of old quite yet. Although I think I do cover that in my timeline stream, and that is archived on like the main section of my channel, I believe. Jarhead says, your fate is already sealed if you're for sure going to be reborn through the Erdtree. Potentially. And so one thought that I had about the way that the Tarnished would come back would be that if their fates are sealed and instead they become the duty or destiny, that it's kind of like the curse which keeps bringing them back until they give up on the process of becoming Elden Lord. So they give up their duty, they give up their purpose, and that might be like why they like lose their mission. But I didn't quite get back around to that point. So I do have a couple of loose ends in this draft so far where I wanted to go back to the Tarnished Golden Sunflowers and compared them to the Golden Sunflowers, because in the Altus Plateau region, you get the golden sunflowers, the normal ones, and they have like a super bright yellow hue, and they're all like, you know, by the big Erdtree. And so one of my thoughts is that if the Erdtree was losing its abundance in an age now long past, then once the Erdtree got transformed, it may have taken time for the new version of the Erdtree's blessings to reach all of the sunflowers again, but it never reached the outlands where you could find like the Tarnished Golden Sunflowers, and that could potentially account for the difference between them. And I think that also accounts for why Erdleaf flowers are kind of wilted and fading, because they aren't being sustained by the Erdtree like they used to be from like absorbing the Erdtree's fallen leaves. So it's a little bit awkward to bring up because even now the Erdtree's leaves do fall sort of, but they give you like the temporary buff to gain more runes, and then they just like kind of disappear. So I'm not entirely sure whether or not that's meant to be more significant that they disappear and don't stay on the ground, or if it's just a gameplay mechanic. And I could kind of see it going either way, to be honest. Ontos asks, can't an argument be made that the Erdtree becoming the embodiment of Orderline and the protection spell as the Greater Will's Elden Ring becoming the dominant power in the realm? So replacing Fair Missoula's ring. So I would disagree with you implicitly that Fair Missoula's ring is different from the Greater Will's Elden Ring. So that's just a complete disagreement we have there. So, but to answer your question in a different way, you believe that Placidusax was Elden Lord, whereas I disagree with that. So let's pull up the Remembrance of the Dragon Lord. So it says the Dragon Lord whose seat lies at the heart of the storm beyond time is said to have been Elden Lord in the age before the Erdtree. Once his god was fled, the Lord continued to wait its return. So even though this description says that he was said to have been Elden Lord in the Ring of the Erdtree, my point is it's only said to have been Elden Lord. It's not a fact. And when you look at everything else relating to first Elden Lord, it unequivocally brings up Godfrey. Wait, why am I not returning anything? Anyway, I'll type in Elden Lord. So, okay, Axe of Godric and Godfrey will mention it, that this golden battle axe is emblazoned with the figure of a beast representing the strength of Godfrey, first Elden Lord and patriarch of the golden lineage. And this does not use any hearsay. It's just a straight listed fact. And because of that, I don't think we have the authority to kind of contravene it. And this gets supported in other item descriptions like the Elden Lord set, the Axe of Godfrey, Weapon of Godfrey, Elden Lord. Does this actually just call him Elden Lord? That's kind of funny. Let me look at the Japanese here real quick. Okay, no, that makes sense. So he's just called Elden Lord in this one, which is fine. And then all of the Elden Lord set calls him the first Elden Lord. So, Saisho no Erode no. So, Saisho is like the first, Erode is like Elden, and O is Lord. So it's really clear that he is the first Elden Lord. And so the way that I reconcile these two ideas is that even if the ring was kind of under the dominion of Placidusax, I don't think he acted in the capacity of a lord by activating the ring or using it in such a way to enforce order upon the lands between. And I feel as though that was most likely changed when Godfrey and Marika got together, and he must have done something with Marika to brandish the Elden Ring and kind of create a new type of order in the lands between. And at that point, I don't think the Elden Ring had as much power as it does now. And I think the way that it gained power was through Godfrey's conquest, which, oh yeah, I guess I didn't bring it up in the video or in the script yet, that subjugation? I did have it in an earlier part of the draft. So, okay. The Lowlander's rune does have a bit of a mistranslation where it says, Grace was brought to the very fringes and lowlands of the lands between, and with the Golden Order came the weight of its history, a history of conquest and subjugation. The Japanese for it doesn't use Golden Order, it uses Golden Tree, which means Erd Tree. So, Grace was brought to the very fringes and lowlands of the lands between, and with the Erd Tree came the weight of its history, a history of conquest and subjugation. And then I think that ties into what, protection of the Erd Tree? Was that what it was? Yeah. Protection of the Erd Tree, saying, in the beginning, everything was in opposition to the Erd Tree, but through countless victories and war, it became the embodiment of order. So hopefully that answers your questions. Ontos asks, does it make sense to view that to be how history gets perverted by whomever is currently the authority? I don't believe so, because the item descriptions relating to Godfrey are stated as a fact, whereas the only one relating to Placidusax is hearsay. So fact outweighs opinion, and I think the Dragon Lord being called an Elden Lord is a matter of opinion. That comes from a time where people can't conceive of a lands between without an Elden Lord, if that makes any sense. Onto says, you feel like the game is consistently using Erdtree and Golden Order as synonyms. Did you get that vibe? You can get that vibe. I think when you look at the Japanese, it is a little bit more consistent there. And also for a little bit of reference here, let's go back to, what was I just looking at? Lowlander. In the Lowlander's rune, as far as like English goes, Golden Order sounds very distinct from Erdtree, and there's very little shared characters or words or like rude words between the two. However, in Japanese, you have Ogon, which means gold, and Ju here, or Ki, can be read as tree. So you have Golden Tree, which means Erdtree. That's always what the Erdtree is called. But if you take Ogon and put Ritsu behind it, it could look, I mean, that's what you get Golden Order. So, oh, that's a cut item anyway. Hold on. So Discus of Light, Triple Rings of Light, Golden Order. Okay, so the first three characters here, the first two are golden, and then the last one is order. And so if you're the translator, you might just see golden and then like not pay as much attention to this character as you should have, and could inadvertently write golden order instead of golden tree, aka Erd tree. I think that's a very possible human error as to why this other description got a little bit altered, perhaps. So, I don't think Erdtree and Golden Order are synonyms, although they are equated at times in like a couple of like the ghost dialogues. But part of my rationale for that is right now the current version of the Erdtree that we do have in the Lands Between is like the Golden Order Fundamentalists version of the tree, as controlled by Radagon and or America. So that's kind of why I wanted to bring up this script video idea, because I want to talk about the Grace of Old and the kind of former form of the Erdtree, which I don't think has been explored as thoroughly as it could have been by other content creators. And yeah, that's kind of pretty much it right there. I do think there are two forms of the Erdtree, but it's all always been one Erdtree. So trying to think of a fair real life example to like make that make more sense. Okay. So imagine a glass of milk, but you add chocolate syrup to it. It's still a glass of milk, but now it's chocolate milk. So take the Erdtree and add some yellow to it. It's still the Erdtree, but now it's a Golden Order Fundamentalist Erdtree, I guess. Does that make sense? All right, let me hydrate real quick. Now I wish I remember what that other thing was that we were talking about that I like blanked on. Yeah, I just don't remember. Okay. All right. So do you guys have any more questions or comments? Because if not, I think that's about all I can talk about for now, and I might just like end the stream here. I'm not so sure if I should like take a break from streaming and like kind of work on this draft a bit more, or if I should just like try to power through. I mean, that just kind of sounds like an awful idea. I would definitely probably not get this done in time for the end of February, but I don't know. So Ontos asks, what do you surmise is the source of the red tint being referred to? And since we do see the rod being red, can it relate to the plucking moments? So yeah, that's kind of the central thesis behind this essay here, where I think part of the reason that the primordial gold, which might not actually even really be a concept, is that it comes from a time when life and death were both integrated into the Elden Ring, and once death got removed, the redness associated with the rune of death may have gone with it and kind of put us in the stasis because of the Golden Order fundamentalists using the power of regression to make life immutable and unchanging, which is kind of evidenced by the golden or gold-tinged excrements description. Oh yeah, and so does that go back to the plucking moment? So, as I was saying earlier in the script, I think there were like 4 distinct possibilities of when the red tint of the gold could have been removed from, or like been removed from Grace. And those 4 possibilities were either when, what did I list? Let me type in 4. It's so the 4 possibilities is that the red went away when death got removed from the Elden Ring, when Marika divested Godfrey and his tarnished warriors of their grace, when Radagon became Elden Lord, or when the Elden Ring got shattered. So I don't think shattering of the Elden Ring coincides with the red being removed for a variety of reasons, but I'll just kind of like leave that alone for now. As far as when the Rune of Death got removed from the Elden Ring, that's a contentious subject. I don't think the Rune of Death was removed when Godfrey immediately became Elden Lord for a variety of reasons. So, this removing the Rune of Death might be related to when Marika divested Godfrey and his Warriors of Grace is kind of the point that I'm like moving towards. And I think the most likely time that would have happened of Marika divesting Godfrey and his Warriors of Grace would have been on or near the time Radagon became Elden Lord, because I think she needed the Karian sorcery to be able to manipulate the fate in the Grace, potentially with like using some like lunar stuff. And I think during Godfrey's reign, fate was free to like roam around in the night skies, and that like ties into like the weaker part of the Elden Ring and not being the full embodiment of order until like Godfrey completes his conquest. And the fate in the night skies becoming fettered with the Golden Order specifically. Buster said, it's like the temple in Jerusalem. It was Jewish, then Islamic people built a mosque there. And yeah, I think I could definitely see those kind of parallels in Leyndell itself. Like the lower quarter of Leyndell uses more Nox style architecture, or at the very least, you could say like Celian style architecture, which Celia is supposed to be a township descended from the Nox. So it just kind of makes sense to me that whatever is in Leyndell is also related to the Nox. And in the upper quarter, you have more like Erdtree, like Golden Order style, like specific buildings up there. But setting that aside, you also have like the fortified manor, which doesn't match up with like anything else in the region in Leyndell. And the kind of difference in the rampart of the fortified manor versus like the outer ramparts of Leyndell is also kind of fascinating to consider as well. Tea-Watered Houseplant asks, do I think Placidusax's ruin being gold without red matters, as well as their wings being more yellow? That's a really good question. I have wondered about that, and I think one interesting aspect to me of Placidusax's ruin is that it scales purely on faith. Oh yeah, and I meant to talk about this at some point in the script as well, that Destined Death also scales on faith, and Golden Order incantations use intelligence and faith, so it seems like Destined Death is kind of incompatible with Golden Order stuff to begin with. But like setting that aside, the Destined Death Blackblade incantation used by Malekith also uses the ancient Erdtree seal as opposed to like a Golden Order one. So I think the reason why it used the ancient Erdtree seal is because that was a type of power that was active during the time of the ancient Erdtree. So as for like Placidusax's ruin, I don't have the best answer as to why it's like purely gold without being red, but I think like the primeval lightning, as it's called, is just kind of awkward in general. And I've wondered whether or not the reason why it's so red is because it is either imbued too much with the power of life or perhaps too much with the power of death. But I don't know. Actually, maybe that kind of matters because Godwyn's lightning is supposed to come from Fortisax, but now it's Death Lightning because of Deathblight. So Was it originally red and then changed into becoming black because of the Rune of Death? Could you potentially argue that removing the Rune of Death changed red lightning of the dragons into gold? I like that idea, but I also dislike it because there are, like, the ancient dragons still do use red lightning, so it doesn't make a ton of sense. I have wondered whether or not the whole reason the war against the ancient dragons broke out is because the Erdtree got altered in some way, and maybe because like gold got altered in some way, and like the dragons were reacting to that. It makes a lot of sense to me, especially because like Godfrey doesn't go to meet them; it's Godwin specifically. But I don't really know. Ontos thinks it would have been red if Deathblight didn't pervert that. Yeah, so my like train of thought now is if Deathblight can alter the redness, and Deathblight is partially destined death to some degree, does that really matter? I don't know. It's just kind of like a thought. I don't think I could like really pull that in one specific direction and run with it. So yeah, all right guys, if you have more questions, feel free to like share them on the Discord. I'll like try to answer them when I can, as always. And I think that'll pretty much like cover this stream for now. It didn't quite work out the way that I wanted it to, but nonetheless, I do hope that it like gives you guys a better insight as to like this process here, and hopefully it could serve some of you guys help in that regard as well if you're interested in content creation. So hey, Drunk Mage, welcome on in. You only caught the tail end? Yeah, I'm sorry. This is like one of the ones where it's kind of unfortunate to like catch me in the middle of the live stream, just because it like was so much of a flow type thing where like coming in the tail end, you're just going to kind of be lost in the sauce there. So sorry I could make that a bit more digestible for you. But nonetheless, thank you for joining in again. It's been a minute. All right, so that'll be it for me for tonight. I am going to think about whether I want to stream again tomorrow or if I want to take that time to continue to work on this kind of script. If you guys feel a certain kind of way, if you want me to like continue to react to other people's lore stuff, let me know either like here in the video comments or on the Discord, and hopefully I'll catch you on the next one. I can't say it's tomorrow, but yeah, nonetheless, take care, stay safe. Last Protagonist out.